Hey, another episode of Adam Pinz's Garage and Fabrication. Today we're working on a 98 Honda CRV, and it's had some transmission issues. It's been rebuilt, transmission's been rebuilt, and it's got a lot of really fine aluminum in the fluid. So with these transmissions, they don't have a replaceable filter per se. They do, but you have to split the case to get to it. So if you split the case, you may as well rebuild it at that point. What I think is going on with this is that they reused the torque converter from a previous failure, and there's a lot of aluminum floating around in there. Changed the fluid multiple times, but there's still just bunch of really fine aluminum up inside there. And I think they probably didn't clean the case very well either. I did find a tooth from it was a reversed shift slide. So it's a tooth from the reverse, where the slide collar shifts it into reverse, just a tooth off of that. I don't know if it's from the current collar or from a previous collar. So that's the only steel that I found in the transmission. The rest of it is it's non-metallic or non-magnetic. It won't stick to the magnet when you're running around in the pan, but you can see it just sparkling in the fluid. And so since we don't have a really good filter on these, it's more of like a screen. And then there are little screens inside, like the tubes and stuff, to try and keep the larger particles out of the valve bodies, but these screens on these transmissions tend to plug up with the particles over time. And so to remedy this without changing the fluid 8 million times, and I don't like doing a fluid flush. I've done them at shops, and depending on the transmission, you could do more damage than you're helping with an actual flush machine. Some transmissions are fine with it, but unless you've done a few of them of the same type, it's kind of hard to know for sure. So what I've done is I've installed an inline filter. It's a magnefine is the brand. Actually, I bought it right off of their website. It's a transmission filter. It's made of stainless steel. It has a bypass valve in it, so it can bypass as soon as it's full. It won't hinder your fluid flow. And here it is. Right down here. So if you look at it really close, I have seen some videos on this, and the one guy points out, it's supposed to be stainless steel, but why has it got rust on it? Guys, it's not rust. That's just where they welded it together. It's a coloration from the heat of the weld. This is stainless steel. And I guess I used injection clamps on it, but only because that's what I had laying around that would fit. As you can see, it just uses a spring clamps. It doesn't need anything fancy. Regular hose clamps will work. But what I did was I checked online to see if people knew which way the fluid flows, because you're supposed to install this after the fluid cooler. So on the return, apparently as it warms up, it can cause things to come out of the cooler and stuff, and it actually says to install it after, and I think it also mentions flow for it as well. There's a direction to it. I don't know if you can see the arrow right on the side. So on the CRV, this one, the longer line comes out and the fluid flows that way. So this will be the right hand line right here. I actually, even after looking online, I was like, you know what, I really want to be sure. So I pulled the hose off, had my wife just fire it up for a second and shut it off. And it sprayed fluid out of the hose, so I know that's the direction of flow. So I won't be impeding anything there. I wish I had a bracket to hold it in place, but it seems pretty good. I've just got a couple of zip ties holding it to the shroud, and I did cut a section of the hose out, and the other hose is underneath, but where I zip tied it to, it's got probably a 1/4 of an inch gap, so I'm not real worried about it rubbing through. We'll keep an eye on it. I'll check on it next time I see it. If it looks like it's making contact for any reason, then I'll make a modification, whether it be putting a piece of hose over top of it. You can do that if it's touching. Take another piece of hose that's larger and just stick it over, just slice it down and then stick it over top of the hose that's there. And actually the factory hose on the long section already has kind of a sleeve that goes over top of that one. That's to protect it, I think, from the heat of the exhaust manifold. But super easy. It seems to be working so far. We're going to try that out and see if we can get all of the little tiny metal filings out of the system, because this will filter down much smaller than any of the screens that are in this. And being that it has a bypass valve, it's got to be filtering down pretty small, so that it's got that safety, so it'll open up the valve and flow free once the filter is completely plugged. You can change these. I don't remember what the interval recommended was, but do them like every 15,000 miles or something. And once it's installed, especially on this one, it's pretty easy to get to. So try it out. So far so good. I might do or put a message on there of an update later on, let everybody know how it's working. But I think this transmission is going to come back. I mean, the worst problem that we're having with it is just all that stuff building up, and I think it might be under this solenoid plate. There are some tubes with screens in them, and I think it's the 2-3 shift is the main issue with this one, where I think it's got stuff clogging up into the screens and causing it to not want to hit that 2-3 shift right. It's holding the shift, and we don't want that. Everything else works fine on it. I do wish that it hit the shifts harder. Super soft, which is a typical Honda automatic transmission problem, which is why these only last about 100,000 miles. They're hitting the shifts too soft. If you have a transmission that's hitting a shift hard does not hurt the transmission. It's actually better to hit the shift hard. The problem lies if your engine revs between the shift. If it revs and then hits the shift hard, that's when stuff can break, and it can also slip the clutches while doing that. So that's a bad thing. If it just hits the shifts real firm, that's not an issue. Check your fluid, change it out, throw a filter in, whatever you need to do. Or sometimes it'll be in the valve body, where one of your valves is just a little sticky. Maybe some transmissions you may need to change out a valve body, or just have the valve body rebuilt. But if you catch it before it becomes an issue where it's slipping the clutches, then you can save the transmission. I'm hoping that this transmission was just super dirty. I think that's the case from what I've seen from the GM Reman transmissions that I've installed, most people don't bother to clean the cases properly, and they end up with a lot of crud from previous failures stuck inside them. And even if you do clean the case properly, I did have a transfer case that I tore down. It was a crazy failure. It destroyed everything. I replaced almost everything inside it, and half of the case. It's basically a new transfer case when I was done. And there were, you know, even though I pressure washed that half of the case and scrubbed it, I did tear it down later because I forgot a snap ring. Fail, threw it together a little too quick, and the diagram that I had didn't show the snap ring. It had every other snap ring, but it didn't show that one. And I trusted the diagram too much, but I went to clean off my bench after I'd already installed it in the truck, and wait, there's an extra snap ring. Yeah, so that sucked. And I did notice once because I had already had it in the truck, I went out and tested it just to see if there was anything wrong with it because of the snap ring being gone. And it was, what was it? It wouldn't go into low range, I think it was. And I went through the whole assembly on the diagram and remembering how it went together. Figured out, yeah, that snap ring is the whole problem. So I just tore it down real quick and, well, pulled it out, tore it down real quick. And even just after a few miles of driving on it, there was some pieces that kind of decided to come out of nowhere into the nooks and crannies it must have been hiding. And so it was a good thing to clean it out again, make sure there was no extra crud caught in there, and put that back together with the snap ring in place, and that transfer case has been going great ever since. So hoping that there's not anything serious. The only thing I can figure with this transmission is if there is something seriously wrong, it's got to be a clearance issue where something is rubbing on something, but it's not bad enough that it's making any noise. It's like if something's rubbing on something, you should be able to hear it. So I'm not hearing anything. I'm not really seeing anything with the borescope when I go in there. It's got to be just crud from the torque converter and stuff just built up in the case. But I'm going to filter it out with the magnifine filter and see how she goes. Yeah, this is kind of a quick video, but hey, keep on wrenching, guys.